The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm golden light over the countertops. It had been one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. First, the coffee machine had broken, then my washing machine decided to flood the laundry room. But the worst of it? The kitchen sink had completely stopped working, the pipes groaning whenever I turned the faucet, only to cough out nothing but an ominous gurgle. I had sighed in frustration, standing there with my arms crossed, contemplating calling a plumber when a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was my neighbor's son, Jake. Jake had been coming around for years, ever since his family moved in next door. He had grown up before my eyes, gone from a lanky teenager to a broad-shouldered, confident young man. He had always been helpful, the kind of guy who mowed lawns, fixed things, and never hesitated to lend a hand. I had watched him carry heavy bags of mulch for his father, seen him working under the hood of his truck, muscles flexing as he wiped sweat from his brow. And now, he was standing at my doorstep, a toolbox in hand, flashing me that easy, boyish grin. "Hey, Miss Carter. My mom said you were having trouble with your sink? Thought I'd come take a look." I exhaled in relief. "Oh, Jake, you're a lifesaver. Come on in." He stepped inside, his presence instantly filling my kitchen with an air of quiet confidence. His movements were fluid, easy, as he set his toolbox down and crouched in front of the sink. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." I leaned against the counter, watching as he unscrewed the panel beneath the sink, his strong hands working deftly as he assessed the pipes. The way his shirt stretched across his back as he reached forward was distracting. I swallowed hard, pressing my lips together as I shook the thought from my head. He was just fixing my sink. That was all. "Looks like you've got a clog," he muttered, pulling out a wrench. "Might take a little while to clear out." I nodded, forcing myself to focus on his words instead of the way his biceps flexed with each movement. "That's fine. Take your time." He glanced up at me then, his eyes bright, amusement dancing in them. "You're staring." Heat flooded my cheeks instantly. Oh no, I was just..." He chuckled, shaking his head as he turned back to the pipes. "It's all right. I don't mind." I inhaled sharply, my fingers gripping the edge of the countertop. There was something in the air now, something I hadn't expected. A charged undercurrent crackling between us, lingering in the way his voice had dipped just slightly lower, the way he had held my gaze just a second too long. I told myself to look away, to busy myself with something else, but I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes trace the curve of his shoulders, the way his shirt clung to his broad chest. I wondered when he had stopped being just the boy next door and had become this. "All done," he finally said, tightening the last bolt before leaning back on his heels. "Should be working now." I blinked, snapping out of my thoughts. "Oh, already? That was fast." He wiped his hands on a rag, standing up and rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, wasn't too bad. You should be good to go now." I turned to the sink, twisting the faucet. Water rushed out instantly, clear and steady. "Jake, you're a genius." "Thank you so much." "Anytime." His voice was smooth, but there was something else there, something unspoken as he watched me. "Anything else you need fixed while I'm here?" The words hung in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. My breath caught slightly, my fingers tightening around the faucet. Something was shifting. I swallowed, heart hammering. Actually, there might be something else. His brows lifted slightly, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Yeah? What's that?" I hesitated, the air between us thick with anticipation. I could end this right here. Say nothing. Let him walk out the door and pretend this moment never happened. But I didn't. I took a slow step forward, feeling the heat radiating from his body. His expression shifted, his chest rising and falling a little heavier now as realization dawned in his eyes. I reached out, fingertips brushing against his arm, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I need you to fix something else." His breath hitched. And then, just like that, the space between us disappeared. And suddenly, fixing the sink was the last thing on either of our minds. The moment stretched between us, heavy and charged. Jake's breath hitched slightly, his gaze locked onto mine as if he were trying to decipher exactly what I meant. But we both knew. The air around us had shifted long before I spoke those words. It had been crackling with something unspoken from the moment he walked through my door. His fingers flexed at his sides, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "Ms. Carter." His voice was low, hesitant, yet filled with something undeniably eager. I took a slow step closer, my heart hammering. "You fixed my sink so easily." I figured, maybe there's something else you could take care of. A ghost of a smirk tugged at his lips, but there was an edge to it, something uncertain, something restrained. "You sure about that?" I could have stopped then. Could have laughed it off, made a joke, and sent him on his way. But I didn't. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Instead, I let my fingers trail along his forearm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. "You're already here," I murmured. "Might as well make yourself useful." The air between us thickened, something shifting in his expression. His hands twitched, like he was holding himself back. But then, finally, he exhaled, long and slow, as if he had just made a decision. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Carter. And you're still standing here." That was all it took. The last bit of restraint in his posture dissolved as he closed the distance between us. His hands found my waist, hesitant at first, then firmer, as if realizing this was really happening. His touch was warm, electric, sending shivers up my spine. I let out a slow breath, tilting my head up to meet his gaze. There was something hungry in his eyes now, something that had been waiting just beneath the surface. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. I didn't. His lips hovered just above mine, the tension between us thrumming like a live wire. My pulse roared in my ears, the weight of anticipation pressing down on my chest. And then, as if we had both reached the breaking point, his mouth finally crashed against mine. The world blurred. His hands slid up my back, pulling me flush against him, his body firm and solid against mine. A low sound escaped from deep within his throat, reverberating against my skin. My fingers curled into his shirt, fisting the fabric as if anchoring myself to the moment. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the rational part of me screamed that this was reckless. But logic had no place here, not when his hands were exploring, not when my body was responding so easily, so desperately. Minutes passed in a haze, the only sounds in the room the sharpness of our breaths, the unspoken tension unraveling between us. And yet, there was still hesitation, the uncharted territory we were treading so carefully. Finally, he pulled back just enough to look at me, his breath uneven. "This is..." "I know," I whispered. A silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with unspoken words, thoughts neither of us dared voice. Then, as if reality had caught up to him, he took a shaky step back, raking a hand through his hair. He started, but his voice trailed off, as if he didn't quite believe his own words. I nodded, taking a deep breath, my heart still hammering in my chest. "Yeah." Jake hesitated for another moment before finally grabbing his toolbox, his hands still slightly unsteady. "If you ever need anything else fixed." I let out a breathless chuckle, shaking my head. "You'll be the first person I call." He lingered in the doorway for a second longer, his gaze sweeping over me one last time before finally stepping outside. The cool air from the hallway rushed in as the door shut behind him, but the heat between us lingered, wrapping around me like an invisible force. I exhaled, pressing my fingers to my lips, still swollen from his kiss. I turned off the kitchen light and made my way upstairs, expecting the adrenaline to fade. But it didn't. Instead, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. Then, just as I began to drift off, my phone buzzed. I frowned, reaching for it, my heart pounding when I saw his name on the screen. "Jake, can't stop thinking about you." A rush of heat surged through me as I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating my response, my mind torn between caution and the undeniable pull of what had just happened. I could have ignored it, could have let the moment end there, but I didn't. I typed out my reply, hesitating only for a second before hitting send. "Me, Neither can I. The message sent. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing, knowing full well that this was the beginning of something I couldn't take back. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to.